Welcome to our second CEO Roundtable on a topic that is really exciting, especially while we're here in a fabulous sports arena. Go Denver Broncos. And also after having a wonderful Olympics, and we've got things like the World Cup coming up. Topic that's very relevant to our industry, burstable media transport. And we are talking challenges and opportunities. I'd like to introduce to you my friend, Ms. Rosemary Cochran. She is the principal of Vertical Systems Group and responsible for directing the firm's strategic consulting and research services practices. Rosemary?
Thank you, Jamie, and congratulations on your first Telecom Exchange West. So it's a great venue and very different from being in a room somewhere in a hotel. So it's great. And most of all, we have a great panel today, a wonderful roundtable with some great gentlemen. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. You want to start, Wes?
Wes Hannemeyer. I work for Hibernia Networks for the last 6 years or so. Previously, a number of other companies such as Broadwing Media and Level 3 in there in a bit. Been working in the media business for, this is probably about my 45th year. I was raised in it, so it's a very exciting opportunity to be here. Thank you very much for having me on the panel, and looking forward to a great Telecom Exchange West.
Great. Eric.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Eric Kontag. I'm the president and COO of GlobeNet. GlobeNet is an international carriers carrier, and we own and operate one of the most advanced subsea fibers connecting the United States with Bermuda, Brazil, Colombia, and Venezuela. And over our pipes, we carry a big chunk of the, let's say, international capacity, whether it's just data or video or what have you. And we're really excited about the venues that are happening now in Brazil, and looking forward to the panel session.
Hi, my name's Mark Taylor from Level 3 Communications. Level 3 is a global network provider, and I have responsibility for kind of two parts of the business, the enterprise products, but also then the media products. So we have venues and broadcast facilities connected to our network. So this is one of those. So our network extends into here, and we help the broadcasters move television signals around the world.
Good morning. Adam Saenger. I'm with TW Telecom, and TW Telecom is a national provider of managed network services. My responsibilities at the company are for portfolio management for our advanced services portfolios. That includes our Ethernet portfolios, managed services, security platforms, as well as our intelligent networking strategy. So look forward to a great discussion, interactive discussion today.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So as we talked about transport and what transport means, and particularly burstable or flexible types of transport, and there are many different types of applications. Certainly, we talked about the sports venue, got the Olympics, World Cup, Formula One racing. On the enterprise side, a lot of content distribution, cloud connectivity, certainly a big area. So there were really two kind of themes here. One is the bandwidth and the types of functionality that, on the transport side. Beyond a big dumb pipe, there's a lot going on in terms of what happens, the intelligence, and how to make it look seamless for content delivery. And that's the other, is the connectivity models that are changing so dramatically in that it's not just a broadcast video anymore, broadcasting, but also consumers want to see things on their smartphones. They want to have it on their iPad. They want to have it anywhere, anytime, anywhere in the world, on any type of device. And so there's a lot of complexity that goes into what these gentlemen do every day. So I'd like to kind of start it off with one of the topics about something that's high profile with the Olympics. And we had a couple of very interesting stories about what happens in terms of trying to make sure and ensure the quality of distribution. So Wes, you have some stories about the latest Sochi Olympics.
Yeah, that was quite an exciting opportunity for Hibernia in the latest Olympics. but more for the countries that were participating, and for them to be able to work together, and the broadcasters to work together. And that's I think the most important thing in the entire business that we work on, and that people, even though they're competitors for viewers and such like that, but their goal is at the end of the day to get the product to the customers. You know, the ultimate sports right is the Olympics, regardless of which country is participating. And this last Olympics, we were fortunate in the gold medal hockey match to have services for Canada and the services for Sweden coming over our network, and we had an agreement between Canada and Sweden that they would work together, and we send backup feeds back and forth between the two of them. And the morning, 4:30 in the morning Eastern time, that CBC in Canada was sitting there and they were watching the feed come from Sweden as a backup feed, and it was in Swedish. So they were, oh, well, you know, call up the guy at Sochi, the Swedish guy in Sochi. And so Mikael goes over to Michael, and they're just like, no way. Sorry, you're going to have to watch the Swedish hockey game in Swedish, even though the Canadians are playing. But the exciting part about it was NBC, when we called them, NBC said, sure, we'll send you the English as a fourth backup. Now, you're thinking about this, that was the ideal day for anybody to commit a crime in Canada, because everybody was watching TV. And there's, you know, for those of us that are Canadians, it's the sport. It's the day, it's the game. And so four backup feeds was not enough for CBC. And everybody was working together to help them. And having networks and having services, having capabilities, and having relationships with the customers is critical to be able to deliver that. And that's what our experience, my experience, our company's commitment, or everybody's that's in this business, is to deliver the service to the customer, not just the pipe, the bandwidth, but the service, because that's what they're looking for. They have this model of, we don't care if you do maintenance, and we don't care if you have problems, as long as it has nothing to do with when we're transmitting.
Right. Yeah, I love that story. I think that's it talks about the real experiences, the real issues about how to make it happen. Eric, you had some others too in Olympics, and also the World Cup that's going to be coming up.
Yeah, I think. I mean, we had nothing to do with the Olympics. I was just, fascinated by everything that we got to see. But I do think that, let's say, over the last 4 years, in general, our industry has learned a lot. And I think the Summer Olympics of 2012 in London, where it raised the bar in terms of what you needed to do, right? NBC did have, at some point, a blackout, if you may call, where transmission didn't happen. I don't have the details behind it, but I do know, for example, that in they had one of the bicycle races that they were tracking, and everybody was so excited, and they all had their cell phones there, and they were taking not only pictures but video, HD video, that they were sitting through the 4G network, and cyclists could not. The broadcasters could not know where the cyclists were because they were not able to get the GPS feeds off of the cycles, and they ran into a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. And then BT came out, and the organizing committee came out and said, guys, if you could, please don't, because we don't want to ruin the transmission for the rest of the world. So there are certain things that happened, and I think BT actually did a very good job. And I'm not just trying to say I don't have any relationship with BT, but I think it was very, very different. These Olympics from what we had, let's say, 4 years before, because now you have people on all sorts of devices, and they're not just viewers, right? I mean, they're capturing data, so they're content generators, and at the same time, they're viewers, and at the same time, you have it on different devices and platforms, and they really stretch the underlying network to the limit, right? Mm-hmm. So that raises automatically the bar for the events that we have, coming up in the World Cup in June in Brazil, and then the Olympics in Rio 2 years thereafter, and any other, let's say, live events that you have. I mean, it's very, very clear that the game is different. right? This is not just about unidirectional transmission of data the old broadcast way. This is about bidirectional transmission of data, and you need to have a very, very robust network. And building those networks is not easy. And it's not, I mean, these cost a lot of money. And having them just available for the event is a complicated financial equation that a lot of people need to, let's say, need to get into. And we're starting to see that right now in Brazil, where it is the government that is responsible to actually build to the venues. And even though our former owner of GlobeNet, Oi, is the main sponsor for the World Cup, they're just bringing the feeds from the IBC to our cable or to others so we can distribute it to the world. But from the venue to the International Broadcast Center, that's the government's responsibility. And it is very difficult to justify a business case, because once the event is over, you're going to be sitting there with a huge infrastructure that perhaps can or cannot be used. So I think the equation is different, and I think a lot of the people in our space are saying, okay, how can we justify it, or when will we get a payback on that infrastructure? But what is clear is that the end user, to some extent, is driving it, because they want to have a phenomenal end user experience on their device, whatever that device is, in real time of what's actually going on in a particular event. So it's some great challenges that we have ahead.
Absolutely, challenges. The number of entities that have to come together is really expanding, and as you say, it's kind of raising the bar, and I'm sure over the next few years that will continue. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that too, but let me switch a little bit to the other side. We talked about consumers and the broadcast media, but also on the enterprise side, and what's happening there in terms of the flexibility and how content gets distributed and managed and monitored so that the end user experience is sufficient. You want to talk a little about that, Mark?
Before we do that, can I just
Sure.
comment on some of the media stuff here? Because I just wanted to make a contrast, because I think what Eric said is absolutely right. The broadcasters or the customers that we all have in that marketplace expect, in a sense, the big events like the Olympics to be burstable from a transport perspective. But it's burstable over like a 2 or 3 week period, right? You've got to build that infrastructure, and they expect to use it, and then they expect it to go away, or we deal with it. And that's really complicated. We plan for 2 years in advance with the broadcasters for something like the Olympics. You then move, closer to home for an event that takes place in a stadium like this, and they expect it to be burstable for the 4 hours or 5 hours of the duration of the game. And so we have a big network that connects it. We can turn up feeds across the network and then turn them down again. And then at the other extreme is the breaking news for the broadcasters. They literally phone us up with 10 minutes to go to air and say, I need a feed from here to here. And they may do a 10-minute feed to camera and then turn it down again, want it turned down again. So there's a huge expanse of what it means to be burstable from a broadcast perspective, from the breaking news through the more scheduled sports to the massive one-off global events. The underlying technologies in all cases are very similar, but there's differences in scale and planning and complexity, and obviously the commercial nature of what we do. So that's a piece I wanted to add. In terms of then just transitioning into the enterprise space, it's really, in terms of the burstable nature, it's really being driven by people moving to the cloud, which by its very nature is being done because people want to scale up and down for the compute platform or storage. And they're starting to realize that they need some of that same capability within the network itself. So we're building, again, into cloud facilities like Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure, and providing people with transport that they can consume as and when they need it and pay for as and when they need it, so that we're trying to, and it's an emerging space, but trying to make sure that the network economics and capabilities match what they're expecting within the cloud environment. So that's an emerging space, I think, that's going to become more important over time.
Yes, absolutely. Adam, you want to address that as well?
Absolutely, and actually it spans all three of the speakers up here, and it's a great point. And what we're highlighting here is a new consumption model. People want to consume information when, where, and how they desire, and it's professing this continued and more rapidly innovation schedule as the enterprise evolves. in this cloud communication space, they're looking to do really one of three things, right? They're looking to scale their business, they're looking to source new applications, they're looking for a continuity play. And they may or may not know how they want to consume that network or the bandwidth into those resources. But we don't really think about the network, we think about the application and what it's going to do to solve a business need. And so it's the tightening of that coupling of the application and the network and making it consumable whenever, wherever, and however folks want, whether it's a consumer, in the case of the Olympics, or the World Cup, or it's an enterprise consuming the applications, whether it's a communication or a business application that's hosted within the cloud. And we could probably debate, 4 or 5 different definitions of what the cloud means, right? But just any centralization of a resource that the enterprise or the consumer wants to access is what I refer to when I talk about the cloud. And quite frankly, as we talk about burstable transport, it's a new domain. It's a new operating domain. It's not burstable in the sense as we look previously at a burstable internet or a commoditization play. It's giving customers the control of those applications and those network resources that support them whenever they want.
But let me add to that for a second. I think that's what is sometimes difficult for the companies in our space to address, and that is, in the case of an enterprise, sometimes the predictability and the forecast is a lot easier to do because you can look at patterns, right? You can see how people are moving. You can actually look at how end users are consuming YouTube videos, for example, right? And then you can project, let's say, the growth and what your network's going to need. When you look at the broadcast side, more along the lines of what Mark was saying, it has to be instant. And what's difficult, and if you go to your finance guy, I mean, they hate that part of the business, unless your margins are huge, because you could have, for example, in our case, we did for a large international broadcaster, we covered some very extreme games in the southern part of Brazil. And so you're in this little village, basically. It's great territory, but you're in the middle of nowhere. And the entire state is using maybe 500 megs of capacity. The entire state, because you have people that have slow internet connections. It's in a developing region, so not everybody has an iPad, etc. But for this particular venue, you needed several gigs. And so then you sit there and you go, wow, I need to string a network that maybe goes somewhere from like LA to New York through the middle of the jungle at a huge cost. And it's not just one, because you need to create a mesh, you need to have 3 different routes, you need to do all this stuff. How do you justify it? And then, of course, like what Wes was saying, it needs to work flawlessly for 4 days, 5 days, a month. And then after that, you're sitting there with that investment. So what do you do with it? And so building those cases is very, very difficult. Yet the market is going into that burstable, whatever burstable means, direction. And so I think we're at a phase where all of us are learning to address and deal, let's say, with that unpredictability. And then how do you justify it? So it's a challenge. I think, again, broadcast, very different from, let's say in particular, seasonal events, very different from enterprises where you can really sit down and say, wow, I just closed this deal with this very large company, a global enterprise maybe, they want to do telepresence, I need X number of bits, whatever this is, gig, 500 megs, whatever it happens to be, between these sites. I can sign a 5-year contract or a 3-year contract, I recover my investment, and I'm going to provide the best quality ever. But for these smaller type events, or the 4 hours, or let's say the Super Bowls, it's a tough business.
But I think that also extends, though, into the consumer side over the internet, that difficulty and complexity. So, if ESPN wants to stream a World Cup game over the internet, there is no real forecast there. They'll say, I can guess how many people are going to turn up. I can guess how many people want to stream it. And over time, I think they'll get better because they'll start to understand this market. But we're in such an early stage at the moment that some of those large events that are streamed live on the internet are very, very hard to predict and very hard for companies like ourselves to put the infrastructure in place and guarantee that it's going to be there and guarantee that there's going to be a really good customer experience to any consumer anywhere in the world. So, I think that piece is interesting as well in terms of figuring out how much storage, how many servers, what type of stream rates and stream options that we're providing. It's a challenge.
Right. And for those challenges, we talk a little bit about management of that. How do you manage that, and what does the customer want to take on as their responsibility versus what they are outsourcing and trying to say, all right, I just want to call you up and say this is what I need, or control, having some control of that, because in any kind of event or data center application or cloud applications, there's always the unfamiliar. There's always the thing that you didn't expect, and it varies clearly from the jungles to the to Wall Street, which may be the same thing. I don't know, but I don't know which is more.
It's probably
more
safer
difficult.
in the jungle.
But the expectations are certainly different. But let's talk just a little bit about that management. How much management or hands-on do the customers want relative to what they're asking you to do?
Well, for a live event, if it's a live media event, there's huge focus from both the customer and all of their suppliers. They'll have lots of people working throughout the whole period. In many cases, there'll be audio bridges open with multiple companies on, making sure that the whole signal path, which could be provided by multiple companies, is managed appropriately, and that you respond to every problem. We actually, because we're a telco like Adam's company, and there's this sense that if something breaks, there's an SLA and you have a number of hours or whatever it was in your SLA to fix it. But if you're providing a service for a broadcaster, they need to know instantly what you can do about it. It's a very, very different mindset, and it's so different that we manage it with completely different sets of people. It's a completely different set of knock. You need to understand the technology and the terminology, but it's that ability to really understand that you're affecting something that's going live to air, and that the way you respond and react is very different. But that happens then both in the traditional broadcast world, where we're moving television signals, but it also happens with live events that are streamed on the internet. The technologies are different, but the way that it's managed is essentially the same. They're very complex because multiple vendors are involved, but there's eyes on glass and eyes on everything all the time throughout the entire event, and for the setup period as well, where everything's being tuned and set up. So these are complicated things to operate.
Absolutely,
You have,
yeah.
in the traditional, you have the 4-hour SLA, you have the 5 nines or whatever, and the Olympics, we had a 25 millisecond. We were allowed 25 milliseconds outage, period. And I know that level 3, when they do the Super Bowl, they have a 25 millisecond. You're allowed that because it's less than a frame, because they will not allow you to take it down for more than a frame of video. So you have to put, that's why like the CBC thing is, I want to have 4 feeds coming into this system so that if 2 of them die, I still have 2 more sitting there with a 25 millisecond failover.
And in particular at the World Cup, I mean, imagine you have the Brazilian national soccer team playing, right? And just when they're about to shoot a goal, the network goes down. I mean, the country's going to go up in arms, right? So it's a very different world, right?
Yes.
And I think Mark mentioned it. It's for us that are in the telecom or IT or technology sector, we have certain words that we use and certain perceptions and whatever. But when it comes to broadcast and live events, I mean, it's a different language, different people, different time scale. Failure is just not an option, right? And then and if I think of management, what the guys again, I'm quoting BT a little bit because I follow their process very carefully. They were in the planning phases for a good 2.5 years or more. I think you mentioned that, Mark, earlier.
Yeah.
And it becomes a real exercise in absolutely flawless project management, right? There's so many moving pieces. I mean, and we just see a little bit of it, right?
Right.
We see the broadcast side, and in that broadcast side, you have the live streaming, you have the chat sessions, you need to have the people that are on Twitter. I mean, it's all this whole complex world that's out there. But in addition to that, you also have feeds for security, right? Because it's a world event. You need to provide that infrastructure. You need to make sure that the whole, let's say, walkie-talkie systems works between the different first responders. I mean, there's a huge amount of work that goes into some of these events, and I cannot overstate the amount of planning, meticulous planning that has to go into this, and that's pre-game. right? Then you have a complete different set of people that are looking at during the game and managing let's say, the signals. And I remember when we did, let's say, the X Games in the jungle, we actually had different type of technicians in every single pop between the jungle and our connection. Because, if something happened to the equipment, it's not like you can send out a truck and fix it. It needs to be done, instantly. And so I think that's where a lot of that planning and engineering comes into play.
Right. So Adam, you're.
So I bring a totally different perspective here, right? More on
It's
the
a little bit
enterprise
different.
side than the broadcast side, but
Yeah.
I liken the enterprise side to the broadcast side to some extent, and you brought up some key concept: 4-hour MTTR, 25 milliseconds latency. That is 4 hours MTTR. That's unacceptable. And as the enterprise as they're moving their critical business applications into the cloud, they can't access those resources if it's down. 4 hours is entirely too long. They need access to that information to be able to run their business. And so it's a whole new operating domain for the network provider. And I don't care if it's the installation interval, if it's the maintenance interval, if it's the visibility into the network, the ability to control it on a real-time basis, our customers are commanding more. Visibility, flexibility, and control. They command that in their business. They command that of their network provider as well. And again, broadcast or enterprise, it's that flexibility. It's the new operating domain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an important concept because we're talking about that on all fronts of all the applications we talked about raising the bar and about the level of expectation, and a lot of it has to do with kids as 2-year-olds have iPads and they expect that something happens when they push something, and so the level of expectation just keeps ramping up, and as the cloud, as we see those cloud connectivity models or the content distribution changing, and in particular on the enterprise side, they have a fear of putting everything in a cloud and running their business that way, because if they lose those connections, they have to go home.
Well, first they have to overcome the fear of relinquishing control of the data, which
Right.
is a real fear of the enterprise today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And again, the cloud means a lot of different things to a lot of different folks, right? The cloud includes private data centers that the enterprise actually operates and still controls that data, and they still have access to that data. But the network is increasingly important in their access to that information.
Right.
I think that's a very, very important point that Adam brings up, because we, if you look at our kids, right? And I went to middle school with one of my sons, and I tried to tell them what the internet kind of was, right? And in reality, they don't know. So you ask them, and they say, no, that's in the cloud. They have no concept. They're so far removed from the entire infrastructure that's behind there, that their expectation is that it's going to work no matter where they're at,
That's
right? And I think as these kids then become adults and they get into the workforce, they're living today in a hyper-connected world where that type of facility is just there,
Exactly.
right? I think businesses are saying, why should I run my own data centers in some cases if somebody else can do it better? Because my core business is to produce something, whatever. I have a car manufacturing plant, and let somebody else run the network, and let somebody else run the data centers, and it just needs to work.
Right.
And as we become more and more global, you have, again, that additional separation between these things, and the network just needs to be there and provide the reliability that perhaps you didn't need before, because things were more local. And so that experience also at the enterprise level is absolutely critical, and having multiple paths and having access to networks. And again, it goes back to growth and forecasting, and how do I predict how these applications will work on the network. Yeah, I agree with Adam 100%. It's not only about the network itself, it's how the application performs on the network that delivers what the end user really wants.
Yeah, and I think that performance is also really key, and I think people are realizing now, if they didn't realize before, that as you remove or you increase the distance between the user and the application, which in many, many cases as you move to the cloud you do, that the way that the latency affects how the application works is mostly poorly understood, but it can be very bad in terms of the impact. And so people are starting to rethink how they reduce latency. Network operators like us are being expected to deliver latency guarantees and are expected to provide technologies that lower the latency for applications, chatty applications, applications running on the IP layer, which is actually is a great protocol, but not that great for low latency applications. And so that's becoming more and more of a conversation that we're having. It's becoming more and more important to people, and people are putting in place more and more monitoring and systems to be able to see what's actually happening with their applications from a performance perspective with their end users, with their consumers, as it were. It's becoming a much bigger part of the conversation.
So historically, from a performance basis, the service provider would have provided end-to-end average metrics, right? Oh yeah, between New York and LA,
Sure.
You're operating at 75 milliseconds or whatever the performance might be. That may not be meaningful to their business. They require more granularity into not only the segments, but the applications that are running over their business and what a change in that performance may mean to their business. Right? And so visibility is just that first step. It's also getting to the fact of being able to control that experience, be it, back to the burstable topic, right? It's really more about dynamacy and being able to dynamically manage your business, control it real time, or quite frankly, even let the network decide. A lot of times they don't want the business decision maker doesn't want to be involved in that decision. They just want the network to work, right? And they want it to work based upon some of their predefined parameters and let it roll. Whether that's a change to bandwidth, change to class of service marking, just overall performance thresholds as they're crossed, they need to understand in real time.
Yeah, the network is having to become more aware of the applications. The impact of latency or packet loss on one application can actually be very different to another application, depending on how they're written and how they're architected. And there is more of a desire from customers of network services for the network to be more aware of those applications and do something specific for those applications, rather than, as Adam said, for us to offer generic, guarantees of latency or packet loss or whatever, right? They want the network to be able to start to respond in a more, in a smarter way to specific applications, whether it's SAP or whatever, right?
Right. All right, and that's the challenge, because as we look forward on what new things are going to happen, it's always been a question of taking the complexity of the IT or the network out of the business side or the media side, and yet there's so many things changing so quickly, and the rate of change that happens, so that new models become obvious that weren't there before. I mean, I talked, if you were in the earlier session about net neutrality, and talking about Netflix and Comcast, or, Netflix had a business where they were mailing things. All of a sudden now they're, depending on, the content providers and, other companies trying to push it down to the consumer through pipes that probably weren't designed for that. So it's going to take a lot of flexibility and a lot of, I guess, planning ahead. So I would ask, is it more bandwidth? Is it something that your equipment providers need to work on? I mean, what is the key thing, or a couple key things that you think are going to happen over the next 2 years that are going to change these models on how this works?
I think there's going to be a growing amount of a partnership between the content owner, who actually owns that product, who owns the rights, who owns the venue, like this venue here, and the people that own the eyeballs. None of us here own any of the content, own any of the eyeballs. Right. And so we can do this great seamless job of taking it from where that content starts and gets it to that egress point. But unless we have a great partnership with whoever is producing the content, and the Olympics example is we created a great partnership with those people, and many in the room do, and all the examples here. But that's the way it became successful. But at the end of the day, this the panel that preceded us was net neutrality and how does it go through, so you could get it and get it onto the egress point, and nobody is able to get the signal, and you got you got 20,000 iPads that when you first designed your system weren't in the model, and what's the plan? How do you get it to that data center? That data center, is it part of your model? So now you have to have more of a partnership with that data center, and then you have the other things where, Netflix, Google, the host of them are building their own infrastructures. And so how do you work with them? It's a constantly changing model, and the only way that you can ever stay ahead of it or stay up with it is just constantly coming to sessions like this and working with those other people that are building infrastructures and tying into them, staying ahead of the Comcast rate regulation or whatever you want to, speed regulation issues.
Speeds.
I tend to agree with Wes on the fact that partnerships are absolutely essential for let's say for things to work. And I had, let's say, 2 comments. I mean, we've talked about video and we've talked about enterprise, et cetera. But one of the things we haven't talked about are things like massively parallel real-time role-playing games, right? Where people just expect, again, similar to the video or similar to streaming, that things just work. I mean, you cannot be playing a real-time game against somebody else on the other side of the planet, and things happen so late that you're behind, let's say the wheel in the process, and that's something that we need to learn how to do. But a lot of these companies that are generating content, they come from a generation where they assume, again, that the internet or whatever it is or the infrastructure exists. And by the way, that infrastructure is free. And I think that's a big and it's a huge problem. If you talk to, let's say, some of the engineers and very large content providers, these are people that look at the internet level and then they go up. They're creating apps, right? They're creating tools. They're creating the infrastructure for the YouTubes. And their assumption is that A, fiber is there, B, doesn't cost anything,
Right.
and 3, why should they pay for it if everyone wants to use their brand, right? And that's part of the problem that, let's say, that we're seeing, that, some of these organizations need to come to grips with the fact that, yeah, maybe 10 years ago we overbuilt, right? But now we don't have that infrastructure, and it costs a lot of money to develop, it costs a lot of money to build, and somehow you have to share, let's say, in that investment. And it's an interesting question. If you look at what's happening in Europe, some very large operators are saying, look, content providers want the eyeballs all the way at the end of the network. I have to build that last mile. I have to service that access, right? I have to provide these SLAs, whereas a content provider has no SLA. It's all best effort. But yet they want to have access to that end user. How do we find a way for the business to work?
Right.
And then it all goes back to what was mentioned before. I mean, you have to create a partnership where it's a win-win, because otherwise something will break, and it's difficult to address.
Right.
So we're in a state of flux. In my
We definitely are, and it's a changing world. With the partnerships mean some kind of deal, and I think that's we're saying that business case has to be there. That someone makes money and someone uses another asset, whether it's local access or the backbone or the internet, and I think that's part of it. Mark, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. I think there's no doubt that with all of the things that we've been talking about, the bandwidth is only going to go up, right? Or the amount of bandwidth that we all need in enterprises, for consumers, for games, for whatever, it's just going to continue to go up, and it's going to continue to go up all the time. And so we need to continue to lower the cost or find ways of delivering ever more bandwidth at ever lower cost, which the good news is that's happened over the last decade plus. We need to continue doing that at all layers of the network, whether it's the fiber layer, how you light it, how you provide a routed layer, or how you provide the CDN server content delivery technologies. That just has to keep going up. And then I think the second thing, which is emerging and which SDN or software-defined networks holds out the possibility of, is that there is going to be emerging, whether it's one controlled by the other, I see it more as emerging of the application and the network. They're going to have to be much more intrinsically linked for the efficiencies to continue to be made available to people, and for the performance, the ever-increasing performance that people expect out of those networks, and applications that continue straining in what's possible, right?
So the partnership concept, right, and we see a lot of partnerships being announced on a daily basis, right? Let's face it, we live in an innovator's age, right, where everything is happening faster. The partnerships will help to advance that cause, but only if they're operationalized, making it easier for the end user. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that happens. Rosemary, you mentioned the enterprise sparking up the relationship and having to manage the network, the data center, the applications that's contained within. That doesn't necessarily have to be 3 separate partnerships that the enterprise or that the consumer is embarking on. Make it available, generally available to all, and manage the end-to-end relationship so that it accelerates their consumption of those resources. And I'm not just talking about the network, the consumption of the application that they're running, the broadcast domains, the applications, whatever they may be. So those would be the 2 parting comments that I would embrace here.
Mm-hmm. Right, and we see that a lot, obviously, with the apps, now that just emerge. They're hot, then they go away. Somebody figures out something better, and it happens again. So,
or even something as simple as a continuity play.
Right.
Organization needs to replicate data in a center, and they need access to that information. Right. Replication is only meaningful when you have to access it. So. Getting that access to it when you need it is critical, and putting that power back to the end user, whether it's content access or an enterprise applications access, the power should be in the end user's hands.
Mm-hmm. So are we likely to see more consolidation in terms of content providers and network providers, IT providers with network, buying the content and having it part of that? I mean, is that a good business plan? Is that going to work? Is it good for the industry or not? Would you want to start that?
Well, I think there's commercial reasons. Comcast buying NBC, for example. I think that may happen more. Who knows? But technically, I think there will be some people like Oracle, for example, that suddenly realize they've gone as far as they can in terms of delivering the performance. Maybe they need access to some technologies from the networking side, and vice versa. And you have seen that, right? You have seen AT&T and Verizon start to buy companies that are in the cloud space. And I think they're doing that for the reasons that I've been talking about, which was those things are going to merge. And you need to understand deeply the technologies on both sides to figure out how to integrate those in a seamless way as possible to deliver the value that the customers are expecting at the end of the day. So I think they need access to both sorts of technologies. So I think there's going to be more of that.
I'd say definitely maybe. And so what I mean by that is there's value in those combined entities, but there's also value in choice. And so if these combined entities do not operate in an open platform, ultimately the end user loses. Because living in an innovator's age, things do happen fast, and the enterprise, the consumer, they want to act quickly. They want to move resources quickly. They want to access new applications quickly. They want a development platform that's much more dynamic, and doing so in an open environment facilitates that.
Well, definitely the open part of it. I mean, that's one of the issues, is having that capability and having it be replicated or used, over time, so that innovation is consolidated. I mean, that's the, software-defined piece of it, so that it isn't. There aren't a lot of proprietary pieces. I think that's what we're running into now. It's a lot of proprietary technologies, and as things start going forward, try to standardize. But the reality is, there's still going to be, so many different types of devices, so many different types of applications. So complex world. We've got about 10 minutes left. Any questions from the audience? Anyone have a question for one of our panelists? Yes, sir.
It's pretty good for everyone. What type of technology, and this is in the context of enterprise application performance, kind of technologies are being developed to route these workloads across geographically diverse locations? Ultimately, the real question is, who's going to take responsibility for that?
Do you want Mark or
Yes.
Adam want to talk about that?
I'll take it.
Okay.
So from a technology standpoint, quite frankly, that's one of the issues today, right? Is as you look around technologies from a application stance, from a data center stance, from a network stance, they've been looked at as three separate technological pieces to the pie that we ask that the enterprise take on. And that doesn't work. I can tell you from a TW Telecom perspective, leveraging a combination of open standards as well as proprietary software that we've built in our networks to help manage the visibility or deliver the visibility to our customers and give them control across their operating domain. Doing so not just with the enterprise themselves, but with the applications or those that are hosting the applications as well as with the data center. So increasingly, you'll see that partnership start to gel even further so that the enterprise to, with, and through the data center is embodied and enabled to innovate faster.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's an emerging space. I mean, today, certainly from the performance management of the network itself, I often say that network providers provide broken networks to people and then expect them to put devices on the end to improve the performance of them for what they're trying to use today. So boxes like Riverbed and etc. are connected to the end that more efficiently use and route applications across the network. What we're starting to do is figure out ways of building those sorts of technologies into the network itself, so that you're providing another layer of value over and above just basic connectivity. And that's what I'm saying. That's now, it may be that SDN is the long-term path that enables that to happen, but what really all you're doing is adapting the path through the network or the way that a packet is treated on an application-by-application basis. And it's having that intelligence and awareness within the network that it enables customers then to worry less about the network. It's really, really an emerging area though, and so I don't have a complete answer to you.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You guys talked about there, I think Adam and Mark specifically talked about Burstable Transport. I was syncing that up with how customers consume the application cloud services and so on. From a billing perspective, so I get intuitively why that makes sense to sync consuming as you use it basis. But from a billing perspective, the counter to that though is customers like certain What have you guys found out in terms of, or maybe it's too early, in terms of while you're giving customers the flexibility to consume transport services as they use them, but what billing mechanisms are you putting in place to give them some of that?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's kind of often overlooked in all of the discussion about, well, I just need to build a transport service that I can turn up and down at will, and you just pay for it as you use it. Yeah, the overwhelming requirement from most customers is to have certainty over what they pay for. And frankly, in the vast majority of cases, you don't need to have this fully dynamic network. There are particular use cases where you do. Events out of this stadium are a classic example of that, right? There's no way anyone wants a permanent network in here. They want to use it for 4 hours on a Sunday once every so often, right? But the same thing, what we're finding is the same thing is happening as people want to connect their VPNs, which they don't want to pay for on a fully usage basis, even though they could, to a cloud provider. Because they're uncertain about how that might be consumed, they're uncertain around the speed with which they might migrate applications, or they're uncertain around the usage patterns, they're more than happy to do that on a fully usable basis. So I think it's and that may evolve, and there may be more of that. What we're seeing is that it's limited to particular places where it makes sense, but it certainly isn't generic, and I don't think there's any sense that all of the networking will go to a usage basis, pay as you go, because there are there are budget issues that you want to make sure that there is certainty over it, and I think as someone said earlier, they're forecastable, and there aren't that many dynamic changes. Most things happen on a relatively slow and evolving and forecastable basis.
So that was actually
Okay.
at the forefront of our research investigation before we developed what we termed the intelligent network and dynamic capacity. We asked our customers, so what are you not getting today through a traditional burstable internet connectivity? And casting aside for a moment the private versus public infrastructure, the second most common response was visibility and understanding what it might cost prior to an event versus just receiving a bill at the end of the month. And so in the development of dynamic capacity, that's what we do. We present the costs ahead of time. Customers understand exactly what they're going to pay for a specific transaction, whether it's scheduled or in advance. And they get notice of that, not at the end of the month, but as the event is taking place as well. So they understand it up front. They get notification when it's activated. They get notification when it's deactivated, as well as a summary of what those charges entail. We've advanced that even further so that they don't have to get involved every time. And so we've automated that transaction. And even more so, the customers were saying, yeah, automation is great, but I need to understand. I need visibility into those costs. So we feed those costs to any number of recipients within that organization as those activities and bandwidth changes are taking effect. That is probably the two biggest issues that around a traditional burstable service that was not in the marketplace prior.
Okay. Well, we're right at the hour, so I want to thank the panel very much for their insight, for the comments, and appreciate the audience's participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.